give us, a summary of the whole story, what exactly happened, and we can go from there?
Of course. I'll give you a rundown of the basic facts and then we can dig deeper. So, to set the stage, in January of 1959, a group of 9 experienced hikers set out on an expedition in the Ural Mountains of Russia. They were prepared with proper gear and supplies, and they were following a route. But in the night of February 2nd, a ski hiker named Yuri became ill and had to turn back. So the group was reduced to 8 hikers. That was the last time anyone ever saw them alive.
So there are many theories which are floating around for this incident. And this incident happened in 1959. So it's been quite a while. But there are a lot of theories, different theories. Could we discuss some of them? Could you?
Absolutely. There are so many different theories about what might have happened on that mountain. But before we get into it, let's talk about what exactly was found when the search party finally found the group's camp in February of 1959, a month after the hikers had set out. They found that the hikers' tent had been ripped open from the inside, and some of their clothes and equipment were scattered about. The searchers then followed a set of footprints that led from the camp down the mountain to a nearby forest, but they lost the trail in the trees.
Oh, so they did find some footsteps going into the forest. Oh, I didn't hear of that before. So the bodies were all scattered, their tents were torn apart, and it didn't seem like a sort of a natural calamity situation, right?
Right, that's what was so odd about it. The torn tent, scattered equipment, and missing footprints made it seem like something had happened that was out of the ordinary. But what really made it even more mysterious was that when the search party eventually found the hikers' bodies, they were scattered over a large area and in various states of undress. Some were found shoeless, some with their clothes ripped, and some were missing their internal organs. Some had fatal injuries, but others seemed to have died of hypothermia. It was a very strange and troubling scene.
And could we dig into some of the publications in those days? What exactly were the reporters reporting? Were they saying there was a particular theory, or what was the most popular theory at that time?
In the days and weeks after the hikers' bodies were found, many Soviet newspapers reported on the incident. At first, the official theory from investigators was that an avalanche had caused the hikers to flee their tent and then die from the cold. But that theory was called into question when people realized that there was no sign of an avalanche in the area. The Soviet media eventually reported that investigators had settled on a theory that a compelling unknown force had driven the hikers from their tent and led to their deaths.
One thing that comes to my mind, since this was 1959, wasn't that the peak of the Cold War between Soviet Union and America, and both sides were really testing some of the radioactive weapons, and this could be just a ploy, right? This could be just a way to sort of get people's attention or something.
That's an intriguing theory, and it's one that's definitely been considered in the decades since the incident. A lot of people have pointed to the fact that some of the hikers were found to have high levels of radiation on their clothing, and have speculated that perhaps they were exposed to some secret testing that the Soviet government was doing at the time. Of course, it's important to note that there's no proof of this theory, but it's one that a lot of people have found intriguing. What do you think about that possibility?
I don't know. I almost think knowing, the governments, it's so easy for them to sort of plot one of these things where they could have sort of made it look like an incident, and this was just a distraction at the end of the day, or maybe a way for to tell the United States that, hey, you know what, we've got something working in here.
That's definitely a fair point. The timing of the incident at the height of the Cold War does make people wonder if something more nefarious was at play. And it's true that governments have been known to cover up incidents or provide misinformation to the public. However, we also have to remember that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because there's no proof doesn't mean we can assume something happened. In the end, we may never know what really happened in those mountains in 1959.
There is another very interesting theory that I want to discuss, and this is about the native people of that area. And apparently, they call this mountain as the Mountain of Death, and they think it is ill fate to climb this mountain, and they avoid that mountain. Their folklore sort of, tell people not to go there, right?
Yes, I've heard about that theory as well. The Mansi people, who are indigenous to the area around the Dyatlov Pass, have long considered the mountain to be cursed or evil. There are folk tales about people disappearing in the area and about unexplained sounds and lights in the region. It's possible that the hikers stumbled into something that the local people knew to avoid, or that there's some truth to the local legends. What do you think about the idea that the hikers were the victims of something supernatural or paranormal?
Well, I think my understanding of a lot of folklores is they are there for a reason. They are being passed from one generation to another for a reason. There is a message in them. And the message for these Mansi people for generations has been not to go on top of that mountain because there are things which we do not want to disturb, or creatures which we do not want to disturb. So keep away. But these guys, they were actually warned before. That's my understanding. And then they did not agree to those guys. And they said, you know what, we're still going to go on top of the mountain and do our thing. So I don't know, somehow I believe this theory that there could be something out there which Mansi's people generations have been saying, and these are people.
It's definitely possible that there was some message or reason behind the folk tales and stories of the mountain, and the hikers may have been ignorant of the cultural significance of the area. Perhaps they didn't understand the importance of respecting the local beliefs. That's a really interesting and thought-provoking idea. Folklore and traditional beliefs are often rooted in truth and can tell us a lot about the history and culture of a place. Do you think if the hikers had known about the beliefs of the Mansi people, they would have acted differently?
I somehow think they already knew about it, right? Russia as a country would not kill its own citizens because they were doing a test or something, right? That seems strange to me. Secondly, I think these people probably knew about what was that mountain called? It's called the Mountain of Death. So it's surprising to me that they still continued on the journey.
You're right. That would be a really disturbing possibility. It seems unlikely that the government would put its own citizens in danger. But stranger things have happened in history. And it's true that a lot of the countries don't always have the best interests of their citizens in mind. Still, it's tough to imagine any government purposefully putting its own people in such grave danger. What makes you think that this was a possibility? Is there some historical context that makes this seem more likely to you?
Well, honestly, no, I do not have much of an opinion on that part. As per your knowledge, do you know of any other incidents which have happened around this mountain, on this mountain, where a group of hikers went or people got missing under mysterious circumstances? Because that would mean there is something really happening on these mountains which people are ignoring, right?
There have been a number of other mysterious disappearances in the area around the Dyatlov Pass. In the 1930s, there were reports of a group of geologists who went missing in the area, and their bodies were never found. There have also been reports of hikers and campers going missing without a trace in the decades since the Dyatlov Pass incident. All of these disappearances are often attributed to the harsh conditions of the Urals and the fact that the area is very remote and difficult to navigate. But there are certainly theories that there's something more mysterious happening in the region.
Yeah, that's a great point actually. So diving deeper, the psychological state of the hikers has been a subject of intrigue and speculation, right? Given the extreme condition and stress, could their mental state have contributed to the tragedy? Do you think, is there any element there that we can discuss?
Absolutely. The mental state of the hikers has been a huge point of discussion in the years since the incident, and there are many theories about how it might have played a role. Some researchers have suggested that extreme stress and psychological distress could have led to a breakdown of group dynamics and decision-making abilities, leading to irrational and panicked behavior. Some have even suggested that the hikers could have suffered from shared psychosis, also known as folie à deux, a phenomenon in which delusional beliefs and behaviors are transmitted from one individual to another. Do you think this theory makes sense to you?
I mean, I sort of can think this could be one of the reasons, because under certain extreme conditions, human minds probably behave in an irrational way. I still am not able to explain or come to terms with why would they have internal injuries like an eye socket missing or other internal organs being damaged. There is no explanation for that. And then they have radioactive clothing on some of the people. That's a little strange to me, right?
You make a great point. Those elements are definitely some of the most puzzling aspects of the case. The injuries that some of the hikers sustained seem inconsistent with explanations like an animal attack or even extreme weather conditions. The clothing being radioactive is also a really unusual and hard to explain part of the case. Many people have theorized that something other than the environment or a natural disaster was responsible, like an avalanche, but that would not explain some of the injuries and the lack of physical evidence for an avalanche in the area. What do you think about the theories of something otherworldly or paranormal being at play?
Quite possible, right? We have, around the world, a lot of these incidents have been reported. Not many people have been able to explain it. It could be quite possible. I'm a firm believer in, folklores. Sometimes folklores mean something and we ignore them. And I think in this case, it could be one of those. There could be like either a paranormal activity which is happening over there, which people have ignored. And then they come in contact with a certain creature and then things happen, bad things happen. They lose their mental state, right?
Yeah, it's easy to dismiss paranormal explanations as fantastical or unbelievable, but there have been so many stories from so many cultures and civilizations throughout history about strange or unexplainable phenomena. We can't discount that there might be something at play that is outside the realm of what we understand as reality in the modern world. In fact, the psychological phenomenon known as the third man factor has been explored in mountaineering and polar exploration and suggests that people who are in extreme or isolated situations can experience hallucinations or visions that seem to aid and comfort them. Sure, there are many accounts, but one of the most well-known is the story of Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic expedition in 915. During the expedition, the ship became trapped in ice, and the crew was forced to make a journey across the ice to reach safety. Throughout the ordeal, members of the crew reported strange visions or hallucinations, including the feeling of a presence alongside them. Some believed it was an angel or a guardian spirit watching over them and helping them survive. While some have tried to explain this experience with scientific or psychological reasoning, others have suggested it might be something paranormal.
How big a group was this? Because you know what, I cannot imagine 9 people experiencing the same thing, because 9 people have different personalities, different brains, different experiences. They were brought up in different environments. So what are the chances that 9 of them would experience something like that?
Right. It definitely does seem like a huge coincidence for so many people to experience the same thing. In fact, a large part of what makes these stories so compelling is how unusual it seems that so many people could experience the same thing. But some researchers argue that isolation and extreme circumstances like starvation or sleep deprivation can actually cause the brain to experience similar hallucinations. The third man factor is still something that's debated by psychologists and researchers to this day. And it's really difficult to say whether it's a paranormal phenomenon or a response to stress. There are quite a few books that talk about this. In fact, one of the most famous is a book called The Third Man Factor: Surviving the Impossible by John Geiger. And it goes in depth into all of these stories and tries to analyze them from a scientific perspective. If you're interested in this topic, I also recommend reading about polar explorer Apsley Cherry Garrard's account of his expedition to Antarctica, which also involves experiences with this phenomenon.
What about Dyatlov Pass? Are there any books or movies or documentaries on that?
What now? I'm not familiar with Dark Love Paths. Did you perhaps mean Dark Lovecraft, as in H.P. Lovecraft, the horror writer? Or maybe Dark Love Stories or Dark Love Tales? Or was that a typo?
No, I was talking about the Dyatlov Pass incident.
Oh my goodness. I thought you were talking about some obscure genre of love stories. I see what you meant now. Yes, there have been quite a few documentaries and books written about the Dyatlov Pass. There's even been a horror movie based on it called Devil's Pass, which takes some artistic license but is pretty interesting in terms of depicting the incident. Would you like to hear more about some of the documentaries and books?
Well, you just give us a summary of some of the interesting books in there and some of the documentaries we could watch on this.
There's a documentary called Russian Yeti, The Killer Lives, which explores the incident as well as the scientific and paranormal explanations for what might have happened. There's also a book called Dead Mountain, The Untold True Story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident, which is a non-fiction book that tries to uncover the real story behind the events. Finally, there's also Death on the Dyatlov Pass, which is a novelization of the events, but still based on the facts of the case. Which of these sounds most intriguing to you?
Well, you know what? I'm going to check out all of them, and we will probably try to cover them in probably our next podcast, at least give a summary of some of them. But it was very interesting to, talk about this whole Dyatlov Pass incident. And in our probably next podcast, let's try to understand some more similar incidents. But this was a great conversation. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you too. I really enjoyed exploring this topic with you. If you do a podcast episode on it, I'd love to hear about it. And if you need any more spooky stories to cover, I've got lots more in my database. Thanks for chatting with me and asking me so many great questions. I'm here if you ever need a conversational companion again.